Summer 1947. The Cotton Club, Harlem, 9:23 in the evening. FBI Special Agent Morrison walked into the back office carrying a folder, not just any folder. 47 pages, 18 months of surveillance, photographs, wiretap transcripts, witness statements, financial records, everything the Bureau needed to put Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson away for the rest of his natural life. Across the table sat Bumpy, 42 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored dark suit. Calm, almost too calm. Morrison slid the folder across the scarred wooden table. The sound of paper on wood cut through the muffled jazz music bleeding in from the club's main room. 18 months, Mr. Taslape. Johnson, Morrison said. 47 pages. Every number runner. Every collection point. Every dollar that moves through your Bumpy didn't reach for the folder. Didn't even look at it. Just kept his eyes on Morrison. Morrison opened the folder, turned it so Bumpy could see. Page 3 shows your runner collecting at 135 and Lennox. Page 8 is a wiretap transcript from March 12th. Page 15 documents $47,000 in collections in a single week. He produced a second document. Crisp. Official. The federal seal embossed at the top. Cooperation agreement. Morrison continued. You sign this, testify before a grand jury, and you'll serve minimal time. Maybe supervised release. You walk away from the... Bumpy's expression didn't change. Or, Morrison leaned back, confident now, you don't sign, and you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. You're 42 years old, Johnson. Do the math. You'll die behind bars. The leather chair creaked as Morrison settled into it. Think about what happens to them when you're gone? Still, Bumpy said nothing. I need an answer today, Morrison pressed. The U.S. attorney is waiting for my call. This is your last chance to do this the easy way. Finally, Bumpy spoke. His voice was measured, deliberate. That's impressive work, Agent Morrison. 18 months of surveillance. Must have been expensive. All those man-hours. All that film. He reached for the folder. Slowly, Morrison relaxed slightly, thinking he'd won. But Bumpy didn't open it. Before I look through all this, Bumpy said, do me a favor. Morrison frowned. What? Open to page 23? What? Why page 23? Bumpy's eyes never left Morrison's face. Humor me, then open the folder. Flipped past the first pages, past the surveillance photos, past the financial records. To page 23, his face changed. Color drained from his cheeks. His jaw tightened. His eyes went wide. It was a photograph. Black and white, slightly grainy the way all surveillance photos from 1947 looked. But the image was crystal clear. Agent Morrison, corner of 145 in Amsterdam. 11:47 p.m., accepting an envelope from a man in the shadows. The date stamp in the corner read March 15th, 1947. Morrison couldn't speak. Bumpy's voice cut through the silence like a blade. That's you, isn't it? March 15th, corner of 145 in Amsterdam. 11:47 in the evening. Morrison tried to form words. Failed. You've been watching me for 18 months, Bumpy continued, his tone never changing. I've known about it for 17 months and 3 weeks. Now Morrison found his voice. This is a setup. This is evidence, Bumpy interrupted. Just like what you brought me. Photographs, dates, locations. The only difference is, my evidence is about you. He slid the folder back across the table. I have 12 photographs of you taking money from my people over the past 6 months, Bumpy said. I have financial records showing you can't afford your daughter's private school on an FBI salary of $8,200 a year. Columbia University costs $2,400 a year. Where's that money coming from, Agent Morrison? Morrison's hands were shaking now. And I have 3 witnesses, Bumpy added, ready to testify that you offered to make evidence disappear for the right price. The jazz music from the club seemed to fade. The air in the office grew heavier. Everything in this folder? Bumpy gestured at the 47 pages. I let you find it. Fed it to you, actually. Kept you busy with street-level runners while protecting what actually matters. You think I didn't know about the wiretaps? The surveillance? The agents sitting in cars watching my people? He leaned forward slightly. You walked in here thinking you had me trapped, but you've been working for me since March, and you didn't even know it. Morrison stared at the photograph, at his own face. at the evidence of his own corruption. "So here's the situation," Bumpy said. "You have 47 pages on me. I have 12 photographs of you. You have wiretap transcripts. I have financial records proving you're on the take. You have a cooperation. I have a letter ready to send to Director Hoover, the U.S. Attorney, and the New York Times." He stood, adjusted his jacket, prepared to leave. "That cooperation agreement?" Bumpy nodded at the document still in Morrison's hand. "I suggest you don't file it, because the day any charges are filed against me, copies of those photographs go to everyone who matters." He walked to the door, paused, turned back. "And Agent Morrison, you're going to quietly request a transfer. Maybe to a nice desk job somewhere far from New York. Somewhere you can't cause any more problems. Montana's nice this time of year." Bumpy opened the door. Jazz music flooded in. Laughter, the sound of glasses clinking. "Tell Mr. Huff, Hoover, that Harlem takes care of its own. Always has, always will." He walked out, leaving Morrison alone with 47 pages of evidence that were now completely worthless. To understand what happened in that office, you need to know who Bumpy Johnson was in 1947. Born Ellsworth Raymond Johnson in Charleston, South Carolina, in 1905, Bumpy had been a fixture in Harlem since the 1930s. By 1947, he was at the absolute peak of his power. This wasn't some street-level operator. This was a man who controlled significant portions of Harlem's numbers racket, an illegal lottery that generated an estimated $100 million annually in Harlem alone. Think about that number, $100 million. In 1947, in a neighborhood where banks wouldn't give black residents loans, where legitimate businesses were systematically denied to black entrepreneurs, the numbers racket wasn't just organized crime, it was an economic lifeline for an entire community. Bumpy had survived the Dutch Schultz era. Schultz, a white gangster, had tried to take over Harlem's numbers in the 1930s through violence and intimidation. He was killed in 1935, and Bumpy had helped make sure Harlem's black operators maintained control. He'd worked alongside Stephanie St. Clair, known as Harlem's numbers queen. He'd negotiated with Italian mob families, the Genoveses, the Luccheses, the Bonanno family, and maintained Harlem's independence when every other black neighborhood was being absorbed by white organized crime. But Bumpy's real power didn't come from guns or muscle. It came from information. He had informants everywhere, in police precincts, in political offices, in rival organizations. Some people owed him favors, others were on his payroll. But the network was extensive, sophisticated, and frighteningly effective. By 1947, Harlem was in transition. World War II had just ended. Black veterans were returning home, having fought for freedom abroad while facing discrimination at home. The population had swelled to 300,000. The neighborhood was packed, vibrant, and economically vital despite systematic oppression. The numbers racket provided jobs, capital for businesses, loans when banks refused, social services that legitimate institutions wouldn't offer. It was survival economics, and the FBI wanted to destroy it. J. Edgar Hoover had been running the FBI since 1924. By 1947, he'd consolidated enormous power. The Bureau was expanding its organized crime investigations, particularly in urban centers. They were building cases, flipping informants, taking down networks. Bumpy Johnson represented something valuable to them. If they could flip him, force him to cooperate, he could give them intelligence on both black and Italian criminal operations throughout New York. He was a bridge between two worlds, a target worth investing 18 months of surveillance. The cooperation agreement wasn't just about Bumpy, it was about cracking open an entire city's underworld. But there was a problem, and his name was Bumpy Johnson, because while the FBI was watching him, he was watching them. Let's go back. January 1947, 6 months before that meeting in the Cotton Club. FBI, New York Field Office, Lower Manhattan. Agents were photographing numbers, runners on street corners, installing wiretaps on phone lines, following Bumpy's associates in unmarked cars, building their case page by page, photograph by photograph. Agent Morrison was leading the investigation, mid-30s. Ambitious. He'd come from investigating wartime sabotage and was now focused on domestic organized crime. He saw Bumpy Johnson as a career opportunity, a high-profile case that could lead to promotions, accolades, maybe even a commendation from Director Hoover himself. Morrison believed in the power of federal authority. He believed that overwhelming evidence and legal pressure could break anyone, get them to flip. get them to cooperate, get them to betray their own people to save themselves. He'd done it before. It was bureau strategy, textbook. By April, they had photographs of cash collections. By May, wiretap transcripts of conversations. By June, witness statements from people who'd been pressured, threatened, or paid to talk. 47 pages of documentation, an airtight case. The decision was made. Instead of a formal arrest, they'd try pressure tactics. Catch Bumpy without his lawyer, present the evidence as insurmountable, offer the cooperation agreement with a tight deadline, force a quick decision before he could think too hard or consult counsel. The Cotton Club was chosen because it was neutral ground, a place where Bumpy felt comfortable, where he might let his guard down. Morrison believed he had every advantage: federal authority, overwhelming evidence, the weight of the United States government behind him. He was wrong, because what Morrison didn't know, what nobody at the FBI knew, was that Bumpy had been informed about the investigation in early February. 17 months and 3 weeks before that meeting, Bumpy had an informant. Someone inside law enforcement. Not necessarily inside the FBI itself, but someone who talked to FBI agents. Someone who heard things. Someone who owed Bumpy a favor, or was on his payroll, or simply respected what he represented to the Harlem community. The details don't matter. What matters is this: Bumpy knew. And when Bumpy Johnson knew something was coming, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't panic. He prepared. February 1947. Bumpy called a meeting with his closest advisors. Not a large, just the people he trusted completely. The FBI is building a case, he told them. Let them. That must have seemed insane. Let the FBI build a case? Why not shut down operations? Why not hide evidence? Why not disappear for a while? Because Bumpy understood something fundamental about power and information. The best defense isn't hiding from your enemy. It's controlling what your enemy sees. So he let the FBI watch the operations that didn't matter. Street-level runners, collection points that were expendable, money that could be sacrificed. He fed them real information, just not important information. Kept them busy, kept them feeling successful. Meanwhile, he protected what actually mattered. The core operations. The real money. The important connections. But he did something else. Something brilliant. He studied Agent Morrison. Financial records showed Morrison lived beyond his means. An FBI agent's salary in 1947 was $8,200 a year. Decent money, but not enough for the lifestyle Morrison was living. His daughter attended Columbia University. Private school tuition was $2,400 annually. The math didn't add up. Morrison had a vulnerability, and Bumpy found it. March 15, 1947, 11:47 p.m., corner of 145 and Amsterdam Avenue. One of Bumpy's trusted lieutenants approached Morrison in the shadows. The meeting appeared accidental, a chance encounter. The lieutenant offered information, or implied he could be bought, or simply handed over an envelope. The specifics were designed to be ambiguous, plausible deniability. Was it a bribe? Was it information about a rival operation? Was Morrison investigating, or was he dirty? Didn't matter, because Morrison took the envelope. And across the street, on the third floor of a residential building, a photographer captured it all. Multiple shots, different angles. Clear view of Morrison's face, clear view of the envelope. Date stamped, undeniable. The photographs were developed, secured in multiple locations. Hidden, protected. That was Bumpy's insurance policy. For the next 3 months, as Morrison continued building his case, Bumpy continued building his. More photographs, more documentation, financial records, witness statements, everything Morrison thought he had on Bumpy, Bumpy was collecting on Morrison. It was mutually assured destruction. Except Morrison had no idea. When Morrison contacted Bumpy's people to arrange the Cotton Club meeting, Bumpy agreed immediately. No hesitation, no lawyer, no visible preparation. He wanted to appear vulnerable. Wanted Morrison to think he was cornered. Wanted Morrison to feel confident, powerful, in control, because the trap had already been set. The key to understanding this is understanding how Bumpy Johnson operated. This wasn't about violence. This wasn't about intimidation. This was about intelligence, information, leverage. Bumpy had learned decades earlier that real power in organized crime didn't come from being the toughest or the most violent. It came from knowing things other people didn't know, from seeing moves before they were made, from having insurance policies nobody knew existed. The numbers racket itself was information-based. thousands of people playing numbers every day, thousands of transactions, thousands of relationships, all of it flowing through networks that Bumpy controlled or influenced. Those same networks provided intelligence. A runner would mention seeing FBI agents in an unmarked car. A bartender would overhear cops talking about surveillance. A clerk in a government office would notice paperwork being filed. All of it flowed back to Bumpy, piece by piece, fragment by fragment, until he had a complete picture of what was happening around him. By the time Morrison walked into that Cotton Club office with his 47 pages, Bumpy knew almost everything that was in them. Not because he'd seen the folder, but because he'd been tracking the investigation for nearly 18 months. He knew which of his operations were being watched, which weren't, what evidence existed, what didn't. The only thing Morrison had that Bumpy didn't know about was maybe a few specific details, and none of them mattered. Because Bumpy had page 23, the moment Morrison saw that photograph, everything changed. In one instant, 18 months of work became worthless. 47 pages of evidence transformed from a weapon into a liability. The cooperation agreement that was supposed to flip Bumpy became a joke. Morrison realized he wasn't the hunter, he was the prey, had been the entire time. Think about what was going through his mind. The photographs Bumpy had weren't just evidence of corruption. They were potentially prosecution-worthy. Morrison could lose his job, his pension, his freedom. His family would be destroyed. His daughter would have to leave Colombia. Everything he'd worked for would evaporate. And worse, he'd been for months he'd thought he was running an investigation. But Bumpy had been investigating him. While Morrison was surveilling Bumpy's runners, Bumpy's people were photographing Morrison. While Morrison was building a case, Bumpy was building a better one. It was humiliating, terrifying, complete. Morrison had walked in with all the power of the federal government behind him. He walked out with nothing but the knowledge that his career was over if he didn't do exactly what Bumpy told him to do. Bumpy didn't need to threaten him, didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need violence or intimidation, just information, just evidence, just the quiet promise that if Morrison moved against that's power. Within a week, Agent Morrison requested a transfer. The official reason was listed as personal family matters. He was reassigned to a field office in the Midwest. Desk work, paperwork, far from any significant investigations. The FBI case against Bumpy Johnson was quietly shelved. No charges, no grand jury, no cooperation agreement. The 47 pages went into a file cabinet somewhere in Lower Manhattan and were never seen again. Words spread through Harlem like wildfire. Not the details. Those stayed private, but the result. Bumpy had beaten the feds. The FBI had come for him with everything they had, and he'd walked away untouched. His reputation, already formidable, became legendary. Among the Italian mob families operating in New York, there was a shift in perception. The Genovese family, the Lucchese family, the other organizations that had been eyeing Harlem's territory, they all took note. This wasn't some street operator who got lucky. This was a sophisticated political actor who understood leverage, intelligence, and long-term strategy. Carlo Gambino, who would later become one of the most powerful mob bosses in American history, reportedly said that Bumpy Johnson was the only man in New York who couldn't be intimidated or bought. Coming from Gambino, that was extraordinary respect. Within Harlem itself, Bumpy's position was reinforced. He'd protected himself without betraying anyone, hadn't cooperated, hadn't given up names, hadn't traded information for his freedom. He'd beaten the system by being smarter than the system. For a community that faced systematic oppression from law enforcement and government institutions, that mattered. Bumpy wasn't just a criminal. He was a symbol of resistance, of intelligence defeating authority, of black economic independence protected against white institutional power. The cooperation that Morrison had tried to force would have devastated Harlem. If Bumpy had flipped, the FBI could have dismantled the entire numbers racket. That would have meant thousands of jobs gone. Millions of dollars in community capital disappeared. An economic system that provided services, loans, and opportunities where none existed otherwise destroyed. Bumpy protected that by being prepared, by knowing what was coming, by building leverage before he needed it. This is what made Bumpy Johnson different from almost everyone else in his world. Most gangsters relied on violence, on fear. If someone came for them, they responded with force. Bumpy responded with empathy. Most operators focused on the immediate, the now. If there was a threat today, deal with it today. Bumpy thought in terms of months and years. He built insurance policies before he needed them. He identified vulnerabilities in his enemies long before those enemies moved against him. Most criminals saw law enforcement as an opponent to avoid or resist. Bumpy saw law enforcement as a system to understand and exploit. He knew that corruption existed at every level. He knew that federal agents had the same weaknesses as everyone else: ambition, financial stress, family obligations. He knew that information about those weaknesses was as valuable as any weapon, and he documented everything. The photographs of Morrison weren't accidental. They were deliberate, staged perhaps, but deliberately created as leverage, as insurance, as a tool for exactly the situation that eventually. This wasn't luck, this was strategy. Bumpy maintained his power in Harlem through the late 1940s and into the early 1950s. The FBI incident, whether this specific confrontation or the pattern it represented, was part of how he did it. He couldn't be flipped because flipping him meant destroying him, and anyone who tried to destroy him discovered that he had already prepared for that possibility. In 1952, Bumpy was eventually convicted on narcotics conspiracy charges. Different case, different tactics. He was sent to Alcatraz and served until 1963. Even that conviction came after years of investigation, using methods that didn't give Bumpy the same opportunities for leverage. But even from prison, his reputation protected him. His intelligence networks remained intact. When he was released in 1963, he immediately reclaimed power in Harlem because the respect he'd built, through incidents exactly like the Morrison confrontation, lasted longer than any prison sentence. That respect was earned through demonstrating again and again that he couldn't be outmaneuvered, that he was always 3 moves ahead. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. Not from a bullet, not from a prison cell. He had a heart attack in a Harlem restaurant. He was 62 years old. But this story, this particular story of how he faced down the FBI with nothing but a photograph, lived on because it proves something timeless, something that applies far beyond organized crime or 1940s Harlem. The most powerful weapon isn't a gun. It isn't a badge. It isn't 47 pages of evidence or the authority of the federal government. The most powerful weapon is knowing what your enemy will do before they do it and being prepared 3 moves ahead. In a world that was designed to destroy him, Bumpy Johnson survived and thrived by being smarter, more patient, and better informed than everyone who underestimated him. He understood that information is leverage, that preparation beats reaction, that intelligence defeats force. The FBI had 18 months and 47 pages. Bumpy had 1 photograph on page 23. That's the difference between institutional power and real power. That's the lesson of Bumpy Johnson. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button right now. If you believe respect is earned through intelligence, not intimidation, drop a comment below. What would you have done in Morrison's position? Could you have seen that trap coming? Turn on notifications because next week we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz in 1963 and reclaimed Harlem in a single night, using nothing but a telegram and a decades-old alliance with the most powerful mob boss in America. You don't want to miss that. Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't, it was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned his every single day. This has been the story they don't teach in history books. The story of how 1 photograph on page 23 ended an FBI investigation and proved that the most dangerous man in any room is the one who knows what you're thinking before you think it.